This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Support for this program comes from the Gail and Tom Benson Charitable Foundation, committed to funding educational causes.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. There is usually no shortage of garbage needed to be picked up in the French Quarter. This week we saw legal competition over who will have the privilege to do it. There are always major issues along the Gulf Coast, and most recently a project called the Mid-Barataria Sediment Diversion. The governor wants it stopped, and some environmentalists think otherwise, and a little-loved but important Gulf fish, the menhaden, has been under scrutiny for the damage the industry might be doing to the much-beloved redfish. And soon, the coast will be enriched by a daily train service between New Orleans and Mobile. We'll take a look at future passenger railroad plans. This and the announced enforcement of a law that may impact the local Central American population are all on track for tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, Mike Smith, staff writer of the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, and Ben Myers, also staff writer for the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. And let's go on over to Mike, because we have heard in the past week and a half or so that the planned Mid-Barataria Sediment Diversion, which is really the linchpin for the state's coastal master plan, or was portrayed as such, is not going to happen.
Yeah, it was officially killed. It was sort of expected. The governor has been signaling this for a while, but the end was still big news, because this has been studied and debated and analyzed for probably decades when you combine everything. So it sort of puts us back to square one in terms of what we're going to do, one, with this money, whether some of that money is going to be lost, and what kind of project will eventually replace it.
And the money, of course, we're talking about a lot of it, most of it coming from the BP settlement, and that was a $3 billion project just in and of itself.
Yeah.
Now, money has been spent on it because there was site preparation, et cetera, before it was paused. So what happens with what we spent already? Are we going to owe that now to the BP fund, or how does that work?
It's a big question, and likely some of it will be lost. We might be able to reuse some of that work. So we've spent a little over $600 million so far on this project. Yes. And so the state is now talking about building a smaller diversion in the same place. So some of that work could potentially be transferred to the new project. It remains to be seen, and we've got a long process ahead of us for that new project to get approved.
Right, because we'll have to go through a review process. So let's sort of backtrack a little bit. The Mid-Barataria Sediment Diversion was going to reintroduce the Mississippi River to the Barataria Bay. That area was going to be building, 25 square miles within 50 years or so. And this is what proponents say is really necessary to do to rebuild our coast, is reintroduce that Mississippi River. Give us an idea of where this would go and where this new proposed smaller one would go.
Yeah, so yeah, you're right. This is kind of the way to mimic the way South Louisiana was built in the first place. And so they were going to build a channel from the river into the Barataria Basin south of Belchie. So it would go into the West Bank. And then, the Barataria Basin kind of flows all the way down past, Empire and Buras, and then eventually you get to Grand Isle and those areas. So the water and sediment would flow into there and sort of gradually build up and rebuild these wetlands. So one of the big problems and big controversies was the amount of shrimping and oystering that goes on, particularly in the Buras Empire area. And so the oystermen and the shrimpers were really opposed to this. Lieutenant Governor Billy Nungesser was very opposed to it, the former Plaquemines Parish president.
No, Lieutenant Governor, right.
Yeah, exactly. And there were discussions with the governor when he came into office, and almost from the very beginning, they signaled they were going to take another look at this, and it culminated with last week.
Now, those who support it, they're scientists and coastal experts. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers had given approval for it. The money had been appropriated because they say, no, this is the way we need to protect and rebuild our coast. But those opponents said it was just going to be a too great a cost, and literally the project was going to cost too much money.
Yeah. There's no denying that the costs were going up drastically. Part of that has to do with the fact that the state paused work on it, so naturally every minute you wait, the costs go up. So it was climbing, and there was no sign of it stopping. Inflation, all the other reasons. So cost was going to be a concern. We had most of it being paid for with BP funds. There was going to be some that the state would certainly have to cover, and then sort of some maintenance costs potentially that was being debated as well. But the proponents of the project said we had to do we have little choice but to do this. But there were a lot of arguments against it.
So now, with a proposed smaller project that the state is thinking about, will it do the trick, number one, and then also can we still use the BP fine money to pay for it?
Will it do the trick is the big question. It depends on the details of the project. It's going to have to undergo a lot of studies and analysis. Just the core process for Mid-Barataria took about 6 years, and there were a lot more years of debate and analysis besides that. There were some indications when they studied the Mid-Barataria project that below a certain size was not cost effective. Now, that's not the bottom line on it. If you combine it with some other projects that could potentially change the analysis, but all of that analysis is going to have to happen, and that's probably going to take years before we see any shovels in the ground.
And we hear from coastal activists that we don't have years. We really just don't have time to waste on this because our coast has been eroding rapidly.
Yeah, we're in a race against time, and essentially all we can do at this point is buy time, and every day that passes becomes more and more urgent. It's 2,000 square miles over the last century already. Sea level rise is going to get worse in the years ahead, and we're going to lose a lot more. So,
are we still losing a football field every day?
It's roughly that still. We're waiting for some new analysis to come out from the federal government. It sort of was at that peak for a while. It came back down for a while. It's still happening pretty rapidly. I don't know the exact number, but the sort of wild card is sea level rise, which is getting worse as years go by, and in the decades ahead, that's going to become a bigger factor. So that's kind of still the number everybody uses, the football field every 100 minutes. But it's, obviously that's an average number that changes a lot depending on when you look at it.
Yeah, bottom line of the coast is we're losing the coast. We're losing a lot of the coast, and we need to try to save it. So, all right, Mike, thanks a lot. Ben, let's go on over to you. Because this is a very confusing story, and I'm sorry, but we're going to try to ask you to make sense of it. But the garbage collection in the French Quarter, who's going to do it?
Good question. Presumably, we'll find out next week, and at this point, it looks like it could be two companies working under separate contracts for the same work. Whether that scenario, which is just unfathomable, actually plays out remains to be seen. As it stands currently, Henry Consulting has an emergency contract with the Cantrell administration that the courts this week gave the go-ahead to proceed. Separately, the French Quarter Management District, which is a public state-created agency, has the authority to solicit its own contractor when there's not a lawfully contracted company already in place. They contend that this Henry Consulting emergency contract is not lawful. So the plan for them is to hire WYES, which is currently working on an emergency contract in the French Quarter. What happens next week, we'll see.
And the present contract, emergency one, with WYES goes to the end of the year.
Well, it was signed that way. Mayor Cantrell in April announced that she would terminate it by the end of this month.
And so now she has signed this emergency contract with Henry Consulting.
Mm-hmm.
what is the emergency if there was already in place a collector that actually the residents and the neighbors, the business owners, are satisfied with?
That is a very simmering question. The Ivy Waste and the council and many of the people in the French Quarter would suggest that the emergency was fabricated by the mayor, and even the Attorney General is saying that it's illegal because the emergency was created by her own decision. For her part, the mayor and Henry Consulting and their lawyers will say that it's actually the council that has created this emergency by failing to sign a valid contract going back a year.
Okay, so it was sometime within this past week where it looked like the mayor, Cantrell, was going to just stick with Ivy Waste because she had a meeting with some City Hall officials and they came away with that idea?
This was something that happened internally. It came to light this week at a council committee meeting. The sanitation director and two other top aides expressed some concerns about Henry Consulting's readiness to do the contract. They voiced that to the mayor, and according to them, they all met with the mayor, and she agreed that the Ivy Waste emergency contract currently in place should actually be extended to the end of the year, that she would rescind the termination that she announced. They came out publicly this week and said that agreement had been made and that rescission letter had been drafted, and then suddenly she issued a emergency declaration that she didn't tell them about. They basically said they were blindsided by this.
Okay, so let's back up a little bit also with the Ivy Waste contract, and that you say that was an emergency contract. When was that signed and why was it an emergency then?
That was signed at the end of last year. It was an emergency because there was no contract in place. The council, under an ordinance it passed a couple of years ago, has the right to sign off on professional service contracts over $1 million, or most of them. And they didn't want to do that with this contract, so they didn't. Henry Consulting and its owner, Troy Henry, sued over that ordinance and won a court judgment that basically ordered the council to move on with it, that they only have, if anything, a ministerial role in contracting. So with that in play, with no actual contract with Henry Consulting, it did become an emergency.
Mm-hmm.
And that's,
there's nobody to pick up the garbage.
That's right.
Okay. Which contract costs the lesser amount? Which one's cheaper?
So the Ivy Waste contract, which was competitively bid, the emergency one, they got last-minute bids, is $6.1 million. And the Henry Consulting contract, which was not the Henry Consulting emergency contract, was not competitively bid and is $8.3 million. So, yeah.
So $2.2 million.
It's actually 2.1. I might have had those decimals off, but it's a $2.1 million difference.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when does the Henry Consulting contract go, when is that enforced? When does that begin?
July 31st.
July 31st. So the Ivy Waste with the French Quarter Group contract, is that in place now?
So the French Quarter Management District Board is meeting on Monday to vote on the contract. I believe that they probably will vote to approve it. And I believe that would then go into effect also on July 31st or maybe August 1st.
Okay.
Next week.
Yeah, next week. So, I mean, it still is a possibility that there will be two different groups picking up garbage in the French Quarter.
There is. I mean, I have to imagine the mayor will have something to say about that contract and the allegation that hers is not lawful. We may end up in court. It's hard to see how we wouldn't, but I don't know.
The trash gets picked up.
Everybody just wants the French Quarter to be clean and the trash to get picked up.
And lemony fresh, too.
Yeah.
Everybody likes the lemony fresh. Okay. Thanks a lot, Ben. Yeah, it is confusing. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Okay, E, over to you, because you wanted to talk about a change in the law that could impact local Central Americans.
Yeah, but first I just want to mention this follow-up. There was a time when the city operated the whole sanitation and garbage collection. I remember on Broad Street there was this big lot filled with garbage trucks. So it was the city's property, and the people who picked up were city employees. And then after a while, people figured out, maybe it'd be cheaper to privatize this. And it probably is. I mean, now you can at least see there's competition in terms of trying to do things. But it was a big department for the city at one time. Anyway, another issue. In 1998, there was Hurricane Mitch, which attacked Central America and did a lot of damage in Honduras and Nicaragua. And so the federal government established a program that existed already where you have a country that's had some kind of a severe hardship where people could come in and get some kind of favorable status in the United States. And so the United States granted what's called a temporary protection status to people from Honduras and Nicaragua. And they were able to come to the United States, live here without a lot of the red tape, and get jobs and do things. And so that really helped them. Well, the Department of Homeland Security, which is under Kristi Noem, who's under Donald Trump, has announced that this program is going to end September the 8th. Now, what that means, no one's really sure. I don't think it's going to mean that these tanks will come in and drive out all the Nicaraguans and Hondurans. I think it means it's sort of like a general process to create incentive that if people want to go back to their countries, that they can. There's going to be a system where you can register if you want to leave. The government will buy an airplane ticket. It'll provide a $1,000 bonus when you get back. And it's also some kind of a procedure for immigration that if you want to come back to the United States, this will help you with that. But anyway, something's going to happen, though, in September as an incentive for these people to start moving back. Now, the Hondurans, especially, are a very important part of the labor scene in New Orleans. They do a lot of the work here, certainly going back to Hurricane Katrina, but they're really important. And so to lose all the Hondurans would be a big problem. And maybe it's not going to happen. Maybe it's going to happen in increments, but it's going to be something that's going to start in September. And the Honduran thing goes back to the bananas in the 1920s with Samuel Zamuri and starting banana plantations and importing bananas from Honduras. So that's waiting now, and people are just not sure what's going to happen, but it's going to be in place.
So we're talking about folks who came here post-1998 from Honduras and Nicaragua, who have lived here for almost 30 years now. And
yeah. Well, Hurricane Mitch was in 1998. The act was, the law was enacted in 1999, but yeah, it's been about that long that they've been coming.
You would assume that folks are, here almost 30 years. That's almost a generation. That families would have, really rooted themselves here in that amount of time. I
was talking to some person whose business has been dealing with immigrants and all that, and she kept on saying this is cruel to deal with. Okay, it is insensitive. I don't know if it's cruel or anything, but yeah, they've been here. They're the established part of the community. Some of them own homes. They have jobs. Right. Some of them have infiltrated in business. This could be a really delicate period.
All righty, thanks a lot. Don, let's go on over to you with some brighter news. We're going to have now train connection between Mobile and New Orleans.
For the first time since before Katrina, we have train connection to Mobile starting on August 18th. There's a special ride for special guests on August 16th, but there will be twice-a-day daily service starting August 18th between New Orleans and Mobile, with stops along the way in Pascagoula, Gulfport, Biloxi, and Bay St. Louis. Amtrak is super excited about it. The Southern Rail Corporation is also very excited about it. Really, it's something we haven't seen in 50 years. 20 years ago, the line existed, but it was something like 3 days a week before Katrina. This will be twice daily. There are Saints home games wherein this will work for people to come from the Gulf Coast, get off right there at the Union Passenger Terminal downtown, go to the Dome, spend some time around town after the game, hop on a train and go back home, and it's $15 each way. So
how long is the trip?
It's about 3 hours.
Around 3 hours.
Mobile. I mean, it's and there are business owners up and down the Gulf Coast who are super excited about this coming, because as people come and you disembark in downtown Bay St. Louis or in downtown Mobile, they're expecting to have growth around it. Even in New Orleans, where the Plaza Tower site is, they're expecting growth to come as a result. I asked Knox Roff with the Southern Rail Commission. I said, is this kind of something old feeling new again? And he said there is, across the country, a realization that cars and planes are only as good as the big cities in which we can have them. This gets us to the smaller towns and in a way where you can sit back and relax and read a book and be there in not too long and avoid the potential chokehold on I-10 as you're heading across the Mississippi border. All of that goes away. So they really are expecting people to embrace it. The next big news in area of railroads is there is still, I feel like we've been talking about it for decades, but an effort to get daily service and a train line between here and Baton Rouge. One of the biggest holdups there is the Bonnie Carey Spillway. That bridge, there is an Amtrak that runs along that bridge, but you have to slow down to 10 miles an hour. So that does not get anybody to Baton Rouge quickly if you have to slow down to 10 miles an hour. So, and that's obviously rebuilding a railroad bridge over the spillway is not a cheap project, but as Mr. Roth told me, it's also not cheap to add an interstate lane across the Bonnie Carey Spillway. So that project is currently in what's called a Corridor Identification Program grant status. The federal government has funded that. The Louisiana Department of Transportation is moving through the steps on the corridor identification part. After that, there would be a service development plan. He says the real goal would be to have 4 trips a day between New Orleans and Baton Rouge with a stop at Moisant Airport. Louis Armstrong International Airport, and that's what would make it truly successful. And then ultimately be connected from Mobile all the way through to Baton Rouge. They're also looking at extended service along the I-20 corridor in northern Louisiana, and ultimately more connection between New Orleans and Houston by rail as well. So, you know, lots going on in rail. They're also Amtrak is on standby with rail cars during hurricane season. They were during Katrina, ready to go to take people out, and at the time the city made the decision to house people in the Superdome instead. We all know in hindsight what that decision meant. Amtrak is once again on board as a potential means to evacuate people out of the city.
Interesting. So what's the ticket price going to be for this?
$15 each way, and
Really?
then and then you can, just like other air travel and things like that, you can be a member of a points program, and if you travel often enough, there are discounts. There are also discounts for students and veterans and senior citizens and children between the ages, I think it's 2 and 12. I guess under 2 you don't pay at all, but 2 and 12 you get a discount.
So it begins again
August 18th. That's a Monday, and the trains that day are sold out. So
And E, you're going to take a special trip on it, are you?
I'm supposed to be there that first day.
that's Saturday. There's
good.
a special train going.
All right.
I'm
Very
going to try to
good.
be the first one on the first day.
All right, very good. Well, we'll want your report on it. Okay, Don, thanks a lot. Let's wrap up with you, Mike, because there was a study done on the menhaden industry and how it's impacting other fish in our area. What did they find?
Yeah, big debate that's been going on for a while, and part of an agreement that they reached a couple of years ago was to do this big study looking at their bycatch, the fish they catch besides the menhaden, or the pogies as people call them.
Yeah.
A big concern has been redfish, which everybody knows how Louisianans love redfish. We go back to black and redfish and all of that.
Right.
So the study put a big focus on redfish, but other fish as well. It turned out that in some ways it wasn't as bad as people feared. This industry in 2024, through sampling, they determined killed about 30,000 redfish. That might sound like a lot, but the number of redfish caught and kept by recreational anglers the same year was around 800,000. That doesn't include the ones that were thrown away and eventually died. So that's under 4% for the industry. Department of Wildlife and Fisheries kind of looked at those numbers over a 10-year period and determined that the industry had killed close to 10% of redfish over that time. There's a lot more, they look at things like croaker and stuff like that, where a lot more being killed, but those fish aren't in danger of being overfished right now. The recreational fishermen say that's still a concern in certain areas. So the debate's going to go on. They're signaling now, the recreational side is signaling what they're going to push for next in terms of this, but the industry is pushing back.
And the industry is an important industry down here, right?
Yeah, there's hundreds of jobs associated with it. A lot of people make a good living off of this. It's not an easy job. It's tough work. It's not always, it doesn't smell great, but and it provides, menhaden are an industrial fish. It's used in pet food. It's used in fish oils. They get mashed up and used for all sorts of things. We don't eat them. But it is an important fish in those terms. They're important in the food chain in the Gulf and that sort of thing. They're also not at risk of being overfished in the Gulf. On the Atlantic side, it's more of a problem.
I remember driving along the Gulf Coast around Hackberry in the Southwest, and like every mile or so, there's a big pile of menhaden that had been dredged out. Talk about not smelling good, okay?
Yeah.
But their presence is certainly known over there.
Yeah, the plant. If you go to the plants, yeah, very strong smell. It's really interesting to see in one sense, because you think of fishing as the sort of, we all love to go out on a boat and fish, and it's this sort of idyllic thing. But this is a very business industrial. The fish are vacuumed up and used and put through a plant and all that sort of thing. So it was instructional to see a lot of that. But it's, the industry makes the point that we're serving an important role. Recreational fishermen say, well, so are we, and we have a lot of tourists who come here to fish and don't want to see this. So, yeah.
Okay, so they're still working on just making it more balanced for each other?
This is going to go on. There's going to be debate over their excluder devices, how far they have to stay from the coast, all that sort of thing. So,
all right, Mike, thanks a lot. Yeah. All right, guys, let's go around the table. E, over to you.
Well, actually, one thing I wanted to mention about the Honduran thing is that the Homeland Security says one reason they figured they can lift its status is that they're satisfied that the country of Honduras has really straightened out and reformed, and that it's a habitable place. And plus, the Honduran government very much wants its people back in offering incentive also.
Okay. Don?
I also wanted to mention on the train service that in the cafe on the trains between here and Mobile, there will be local products being sold. So local fun snacks from bakeries and things around the area. So you'll have to let us know.
Okay. All right. Yeah, really. How good was it? All right, Mike, over to you.
I was at a ceremony this morning where the new head of the Corps of Engineers New Orleans district took over, and he's a Louisiana native for the first time in anyone's memory, with deep roots here from Cajuns from Nova Scotia, that sort of thing. But he's taken over at a very challenging time with budget cuts and all the usual projects the Corps has to do. So
and they do a lot.
they do
That's
a lot.
For sure.
Yeah.
Ben?
Also, the Sewerage and Water Board next week will have a new director at a very critical time of its existence, with incredible funding uncertainties and distressed infrastructure, and also a new mayor coming in.
Also very challenging position. All right. Yeah. Thanks a lot, guys, for being here, and thank you all for joining us. And we will see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Support for this program comes from the Gail and Tom Benson Charitable Foundation, committed to funding educational causes.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.